Good evening. My name is Connie Boyer. I'm the mayor of Fairfield, Iowa. And we're going to have a town hall tonight with my guest, Brett Ferrel. Brett is our fire chief, and he's also our emergency management coordinator. And just as a time reference, today is May 22nd, 2023. And so we're going to start out with Brett explaining, giving a little background of what he does and his position and how he got there. And we're going to talk about emergency management and who's all involved in that. We're going to talk about tornadoes. We're going to talk about railroads, a few other things, and having your own emergency kit. So those are kind of the main topics, but we'll weave in and out of those things, I'm sure, and probably throw in a couple other things. So Brett, why don't you just start off and just talk about yourself and how you got to be where you are.
Well, thanks for having me. Again, my name's Brett Ferrel. I grew up in Jefferson County. I've lived here all my life. I've been on the fire department for almost 23 years now, and before I took the emergency management job 8 years ago, I was in private industry, worked as a safety director. The job came open, and I was working it part-time, so it was a role that I was interested in. Having a fire background and living here naturally made me want to make sure that we're protecting the citizens of Jefferson County. So that's kind of how I came into the role, and I'll celebrate 8 years the 1st of June.
Great. Awesome. So talk about emergency management. Who makes that up, and what's their role?
Well, emergency management, every county in Iowa has an emergency management coordinator. Some are shared, but most of them are individual county coordinators. And local EMAs play the vital role in emergency response locally, response and recovery. Emergency management got really, I guess, it ramped up after 9/11. The Civil Defense Act's been around since the 50s, I think, and then FEMA was started in 1970, I believe. But they really started putting money in towards emergency management, and now we have Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management, and we all kind of work under that umbrella, and they set a lot of the programs for us and how we need to do that in our training and exercises. All local emergency management coordinators work for a commission made up of all the mayors of incorporated towns and the sheriff and a board of supervisors. So we have a 9-person commission here in Jefferson County.
Yep. Great. And we meet as needed.
We try to meet bi-monthly or every other month. We always have a budget hearing, public budget hearing meeting, if not two, around the January timeframe to set our budget for the year. We do have a budget. It is a public meeting. So that's usually the big meeting of the year.
Right. And we fund that by per capita. Well, all the towns put in a per capita. Right now we're at $2.
Correct.
This year we're doing an extra levy because we have some extra expenses this coming year. Why don't you talk about the hazard mitigation plan? Is that the right word?
Yes. So one of the big projects we have coming up in year 24 is our hazard mitigation plan. The last time our county had a hazard mitigation plan that was approved by Homeland Security and FEMA was 2016, and they're on a 5-year schedule. The plan costs somewhere around $30,000 to help a grant writer write it. It's a very detailed plan of our county that requires a lot of work to get done. It is expensive. We have some other projects that are coming up. So yeah, you're correct on the funding, $2 per capita, and then we implemented a small levy starting this year to help fund.
Great, yeah. And what else was I going to say? Anything else about that particular thing? Part of that plan, there's a little section for each town in Jefferson County, correct?
Little section. Every town's got a section, the whole and countywide. We have vulnerable facilities in there. Anything you can think of that, as the phrase says, hazard mitigation. Anything you can think of is in that plan, and how it helps us guide us through our overall comprehensive plan, which is another plan in the county.
Yeah, and I thought one thing that you told.
It also frees up us to be able to, if we do have a disaster, that's a Stafford Act or presidential declaration, and we trying to recoup federal dollars to help build our infrastructure does allow us to be able to apply for that money. Mm-hmm. And then there are grants out there to build, facilities or certain things that we can apply for with that hazard mitigation program.
Right. Let's talk about, I know we don't really want to talk about, but let's revert back a couple of years, right?
Right.
We had COVID.
Yep.
And at that time, you instituted a command center. So I want you to talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, so COVID, Jefferson County's been very lucky in the disaster area, I guess. COVID, the pandemic, was the first that I hadn't been involved on a large scale disaster, basically. So how that kind of worked was public health was the primary player on that, and my job, I was a resource for the county and emergency management at the time. So we opened up an emergency operations center, I think it was March 16th of 2020, and we spent 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week at public health in our EOC up there, putting out information, figuring out who we need to get a hold of, what we need to do, getting the right information out. And emergency management coordinators all over the state were tasked with getting all the personal protective equipment. And that was through the State Emergency Operations Center, which they had to open that to help coordinate the state response to the pandemic. So we would put in requests. That meant talking to JCHC, the care facilities, anybody that might had a urgent need for PP, which there was a shortage at the time, if everybody remembers. And then I would coordinate that, and we'd coordinate drop-off points. In the beginning, the National Guard would bring it down, we would drop it off, and we stored it in a facility here in town. And then I would take it out to the other facilities of what they had ordered. And, it slowed down finally after about probably 6 to 8 months after that. But an emergency operations center basically is, it's a big term, but it's where if you have a disaster, if you have something going on, a big incident that's going to be prolonged, normally you're going to open it up at a location where you can get the right players in the room that can communicate with each other, make sure we're getting the right information on. Now, it can be short-term EOC open too. You experienced that with the tornadoes that hit Southeast Iowa on March 31st. You were part of that and got to see what we worked on, how we went about that. But it's basically the role players that we're going to have involved if the situation gets bigger or if it gets to be a major thing. And we opened it up on March 31st when the Weather Service came out, and they were all doom and gloom, and we knew it was coming. So Police Chief Dave and I and we got together and said, let's open up the EOC, and we got sheriff in there, elected officials, public health came over to help keep notes, and as part of the EMS side, we had all kinds of people involved with that, city engineer, just to make sure if it did happen, we were ready to roll and we had the right contacts and names in place to make those calls right away.
And what I found really interesting was, everybody had contacts around the county, and so periodically people were checking in with somebody in another part of the county saying, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? Anything coming through. And so we really had a good handle, I think, on the whole county of what was happening.
Yeah, and
even though we were stationed in one little place in Fairfield.
Yeah, you can pre-plan all you want. In a tornado situation, outbreak like that happened, and again, we got lucky. We were down to the points of where we're going to set up EMS staging at in certain towns if it hit that town or hit that portion of the county, to get EMS there and where we could safely locate them for not so much triage, but just to have them there to be able to respond quickly.
Right. And thinking back on the COVID situation, one of the things that Brett was doing, and one of the things that was so important at that time, was to avoid an overrun at our hospital. And so some of what he was preparing for was, okay, what happens if our hospital is full? Yep. What do we do? Where are we going to set up a temporary hospital if needed? So there was a lot, Brett has
We monitored rooms daily at the local hospital.
Yeah.
We knew, with the help from Stacy and Chris, and we knew where there were beds available. But at the beginning, we had it set up. I had made contacts locally that had some beds, and we had commandeered a neighboring facility from Jefferson County to have an overflow site, and we had that ready to go. We never needed it, but we had everything in place in the first, I want to say 4 days of the pandemic, if we needed an overflow center for patients, we had the place.
Yeah. And so your job sometimes is you have to think of what's the worst case scenario, which sometimes is not all that fun to think about. But you have to be prepared for the worst case scenario.
We
and
think
that's
worst
what you
case
do.
scenarios all the time.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's just part of his job. Let's talk briefly about, and I know I'm going to take a side
Sure.
trip here, but let's talk about 911 addresses, because you do have to deal with that, and talk about, what's that process to get a new address and some of the challenges we've had. I think it's better now, but
Yeah, so the other part of my job is contract. I'm the 911 coordinator. So basically, if you think about 911 is the most important thing you can have. So the equipment that's in the law center, the majority of it are board purchases. We just had redid the consoles. We went to a new state shared system about 3 years ago, I believe, on our 911 system. But everything funnels through 911, so any emergency disaster starts at 911, and they're the ones that deliver the information. And it's critical that people can give the most information they can. The one thing that we've seen in the county is there are a lot of people that might put in a temporary house or something, and they don't notify the law center that they've moved or they've put up a structure or anything like that. Normally, if it's a big project, the contractors need that information, so they have to get a 911 address. But I would just tell people that that's the most critical thing. So if you've got a missing sign, if you need an address, if you never had an address, it's critical that we have that, because EMS, fire, law enforcement aren't going to know where to go unless it's in our system. So once you get a 911 address, it gets uploaded into our geocom mapping system, and then that comes up when you call 911. The little light comes on, our dispatcher answers, says, "What's the address of your emergency?" And you might tell them an address, but if it's not in our mapping system, we can't guide them there.
yeah.
So it's very important that our 911 addresses are updated, and it goes through my office, which my office is located at the law center.
Yep. So call Brett if you need a 911. Another thing is there's been a couple times when we've had small groups of homes kind of cluster together with only one 911 address.
Yep.
And so, and there have been cases where the ambulance goes out there and, all of a sudden there's like 5 small homes or tiny homes. They have no clue which one to go to.
Well, and what happens is, those are, we don't have a county zoning rule. So someone will buy a piece of land and they'll put in an address right away, and then there'll be a private drive or private lane, and then they'll bring in some tiny homes or mobile homes or something, and we're still stuck with the one address. So we can find that one address at the end, but they've all need to have their own label and addresses on those buildings. There's one development out south of town that when we address that and we put the signs up, we've had to put them all on the gravel road, all on one. And they were very good to us, and I said, you need to have those houses marked, and they did it, and they were very good, but that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And you got to think, if you're in an emergency, the longer they get delayed from finding that exact place,
Right. Yeah.
bad outcomes are.
Exactly. If you're waiting on an ambulance, you don't want that to happen. So you want to get that ambulance there as quickly as possible. So thank you for sharing that. Did we kind of cover emergency management, you think? I think.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of hit on what I think people, it's funny, we tell the story, and a lot of us emergency management corps, before the pandemic, no one really knew what we did. But there's a lot of things that go on. We stick to a plan every year. In our county, it's an organizational work plan, and Homeland Security, emergency management, like I said earlier, dictates what you do, or not what you do, but hours. So we have to get 24 hours of training a year. We have to do so many exercises a year, either locally or being part of one in a different county. Obviously emergency planning. We have what we call emergency support functions. Those basically list out anything you can think of. And so I have the list right here if anybody would ever want to see it. But so ESF 1's transportation, 2's communications, 3's public works. My pager's now talking to me, so sorry. Public health, ESF 8. So when we had the pandemic, we opened up ESF 8 right away, which means we could pull out our emergency response plan, see who the primary players were and who the support agencies were. and then we could go down that list to make sure we had everybody on board. And during the pandemic, we opened up probably at one time, except for maybe the energy one, all of those ESFs and started giving information out. So we update 3 of those a year. And then our big ESF 10, which is our hazardous materials plan for the county, which is the big one that's required every year from Homeland Security to update.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, there's other things involved.
And you're working with community partners and helping them draft their own plans, You go to the schools, you go to the hospital, Fairfield Arts and Convention Center. You would help. Would you help with a private business as well?
Sure.
If they want to do practice drills or tabletop exercises or
absolutely,
review
and
their plan?
and that's one thing I would recommend. Businesses, they're usually covered under OSHA, and they have to have their own emergency plans for tornadoes, fires. But if they ever want any help, I would definitely do that. But we're very lucky in this community that you have the community partners that you do, and the community partner coalition. So you got Public Health, Chris Estel, Hospital, Stacy, Shelley, kind of the main players, and we kind of get together once a month, or we get together quite a bit, but once a month we'll have a meeting and we'll have the care facilities, elected officials, more people from the hospital, all these vulnerable facilities and people that might have to help. And we come up with a plan, and then we do come up with exercise plans. We just had one at the hospital for an active shooter that Chris and I and Stacy and Shelley facilitated, and we had a good turnout for that. So yeah, the exercising and the planning is a huge part. We do a lot of meetings with partners in the county, not just in Fairfield, but all over the county. And, I always feel like my job is to be involved as much as I can. I'm on the county safety committee. I'm also on the school safety committee that they developed. I sat through all the school assessments. When the governor put out her initiative for the school safety, we had all those assessments from the state that I was there at schools for those. So I was involved with the schools, all that stuff. So,
right.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
And I'll mention that a lot of these plans, you're not giving every detail to the community. You want to talk about that? I mean, I know we want to know. However.
Yes, that's very true. So a perfect example would be during COVID. We had some, like the facility that we had an overflow. We did not let the public know where that was. And sometimes our shelters, this is going to sound funny, but sheltering's tough. But we will announce it at the time if it's critical where we need to send people. But there's a lot of stuff that is kind of governed by Homeland Security for anti-terrorism that you don't give out every detail of the plan until you need to give it out. But I can assure you that those plans are in place and they are being worked on all angles.
Yep. So, yeah, that's great. So we can't have anybody messing with the plan, so to speak, by knowing every detail.
Well, no,
also.
it's kind of like the old school thought was, on the bomb threats, not to get into too much detail, but they've changed the way because, evacuations wasn't always the best thing because it was a target after that. So you got to kind of think about all the possibilities and what's going to keep more people safe. And a lot of that information can't be released until it's time to be released.
Right. Okay, so should we move on to tornadoes? Are you ready? You got
Sure.
anything else in your emergency management list?
No, I mean, not really. We're always planning. We're always exercising. An interesting thing is one of my favorite ones to do as an exercise. I went to Wapello County. They had the Humane Society down there was pouring new concrete. So Wapello County's EMA and Henry County's EMA, we got together and he says, hey, this is a perfect time to exercise our animal rescue trailer. So we went over there, and Henry County's got a rescue trailer. We do not in this county right now, with all these cages that are folded up, and we put up their tent, emergency tent, and about 20 some temporary cages for animals, and housed them there for a day until they got their fix done at their kennel, and it worked. And it was a really good experience because a lot of people don't think in incidents about the pets and stuff, but we are tasked with, if you have a semi rollover that's full of pigs or something, they're going to call emergency management. We're going to locate cattle trucks or hog trucks to come offload those and things like that. So there's a lot of different things. But that was an interesting exercise.
Yeah. Well, and one you don't think about.
No.
Obviously. You know, we're usually talking about humans
Yep.
and not cattle and pigs and chickens and turkeys and, you know, whatever, and your pets during an emergency necessarily. So let's talk about tornadoes. And, you know, you touched on a little bit when we did open the Operations Center earlier this year. And we thought about a week later we were going to have to do it again, but it stayed calm. So one of the things that, you know, I think comes up every year is a public shelter and an emergency shelter. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So currently, Fairfield doesn't have in the county, we don't have designated public shelters. And there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, first of all, the funding, I don't want to talk money all the time. The funding can be, but if we're talking public shelters that are in place now, such as buildings, you know, they have to be, if they're going to be designated more like an actual tornado shelter, we put the signage up. This is you know, they have to be built to certain specifications. If the tornado happens after 5 o'clock, you know, you have to get a key holder there. There's a lot of, and I'm not saying it's impossible. It's something that I continue to work on and do some studying on, because I think it's a good idea. But where do you put them at, and how many do you put? But I'm up for anything, and I'm always studying this stuff, thinking, okay, well, would this work? Would this work? But we don't have any currently, so the big thing I would get across to everybody is tornadoes happen in Iowa. If you moved here, if you've lived here, most people who lived here kind of have a plan, but you need to have a plan for any disaster. And tornadoes would be at the top of my list, because when we think of disasters in Iowa, it's a tornado usually, right? You need to have a plan. If you don't have a basement, you either need to be monitoring that weather all day and making sure you have a plan to go to a neighbor's that's close by that has a basement. You need to make sure you have multiple ways to get alerts. But if you don't have a basement, you're going to go to an interior room at the lowest level, away from windows, just like they taught us, you know, 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. We don't tell people to get in a car and drive 6 blocks to a shelter or something like that. You have to have a plan, because
you don't have time.
Well, the lead time on a tornado, I believe, anymore is like 9 minutes, and that's if it's coming from a certain part of the county. But you know, as we know, tornadoes could happen in seconds. The sirens go off, and it could be there, because as much as the forecasting has gotten better, they're so unpredictable that you don't have a lot of time. And you know, I hear all the time, well, we can go out here, we can go there. You're probably not going to have that time, and you're just putting yourself in danger by getting on the road and going somewhere. The cars aren't a good place to be, and walking's not a good place to be. And normally, when a tornado alert comes across, you have other problems, right? It may not be a tornado; it might be 80-mile-an-hour winds. You might have 2 or 3 inch diameter hail. Most of the time, with a tornado warning, in that warned area, there's large hail that's very damaging, and you have lightning. So we don't advise anybody to go outside. And if you're in a trailer home, that's the one place that you really need to think about getting somewhere if you can. And our trailer parks don't have shelters. Most of them do down in the southern states like Oklahoma and Kansas. Mm-hmm. It was interesting because Iowa's in the top 5 in tornadoes. Mm-hmm. You think about it. And we do have quite a few F4s and 5s. But I would say make a plan in anything. Tornadoes should be at the top of the list. Just like a fire, you should have kits in case, you know, there is a disaster where you can't leave your home, stuff that sustains for like 3 to 5 days. And we can talk about, I know you're going to talk a little bit about that, but the best way to stay informed on the weather is, I have a Facebook page. It's Jefferson County Emergency Management. There's stuff on there. The Alert Iowa program is a great way to get. You need to sign up for this, put in your phone number, and you'll get a call as soon as the warning goes off, and that includes severe thunderstorm warnings or whatever you want it to be. What I would say about that also is people rely on weather radios, but our alert system now is so good that we can put out one-time alerts. So our dispatchers and myself are administrators on that. I think people saw with the guy that was on the loose south of town, we put out a one-time alert. I think the sheriff's office requested that, and anybody that was signed up for the Alert Iowa through Jefferson County got that alert on their phone. And that's critical when we're talking not just weather alerts, but anything that might be going on. If we're going to announce a shelter in place or anything like that, we can do it through that system.
Yeah. I remember when that happened, and he's talking about a few months ago when there was a gentleman that was basically fleeing the law, if you will, and he stopped his car east of town and took off across the fields, and they believed him to be armed and dangerous, and so alert went out, telling people to make sure their vehicle keys were out, their vehicles were locked, you were in your house, everything was locked. And I know immediately Facebook blew up, and, people saying, I didn't get it. How come you got an alert and I didn't? Well, it's all related to this Alert.iowa.gov. So good.
And it goes by county. So when you go into there, you go down, you pick Jefferson County or wherever you want to pick. And once you pick that, you'll have to enter your phone number and some more information, and then sign up for the alerts you want. And then you're in the system, and automatically rolls into our dispatch center. So anybody that's in that system, once we get an alert for Jefferson County, whether it comes from the National Weather Service or whether we do it, is going out on those phones or landlines or emails, even text. You get a text. So it's a great system. It's only getting better. We're looking forward to the next phases of it, and as it gets better. It's been a complicated process, but it's a great system.
Yeah. And I want to digress just a little bit for case in point, and that is to not be outside during storms.
We live in Iowa. That's what people do.
But so here's the thing. In my family, my great-grandmother was killed by a tree that fell on the car. She had 4 children in the car with her. My grandmother became the mother of the family at 13 and had to raise her younger siblings. So that was many years ago, but I still have the picture of the car that's squished from that big tree. So again, it might not be a tornado, but it could be something like that as well,
And I think we need to talk about that because a lot of tornadoes happen at night, and especially if they're rain wrapped, you're not going to see them. If the sirens, so I'll talk a little bit about the sirens too. If you get an alert that says there's a tornado warning, how ours works, which will lead me into the next project thing that we're going to update. How ours work, if we have a tornado warning in Jefferson County, you have sirens you have 3 in Fairfield, you have 1 in Packwood, 1 in Batavia, 1 in Libertyville, 1 in Lockridge, and we have a project coming up that could potentially put one out in Vedic City. When those go off, it doesn't matter where in the county the tornado warning's at, they all go off. This coming year, we'll be, on one of our other projects, is going to be making those automated to where our dispatchers don't have to set them off. They'll be controlled by National Weather Service. They will be monitored 24/7 for battery powers and things like that. But they will triangulate, and if the storm's coming through northwest Iowa or northwest county, like it kind of did in March 31st, it's going to set Packwoods off, but not. And they'll tell you, it'll go by direction. So if it's headed towards Fairfield, they'll both go off. But if it's headed like it did that time, it won't set the other ones off. It's a great system. And we're looking forward to implementing that and getting that. Our sirens were just upgraded last year, which was fairly costly, but they needed to be. They had new radios put in them. So I would say to the public that the outdoor warning sirens are just that. They are if you're outside. They're not meant to be heard inside your car with the radio on. They're not meant to be heard inside your house unless you live right next to one, probably, with your TV on. They're meant to tell you that when you're outside and you hear that siren go off that you need to seek shelter, because they are not technically tornado sirens. They're outdoor warning sirens. So we set those off with tornado warned areas. We also set them off for 70-mile-an-hour winds and large hail. We also have the capabilities of, they all have PA systems on to be able to talk to people from those if there's a immediate concern in an area that those sirens are located in. So they are outdoor warning sirens, and it means just that.
Great. Thank you for all that clarification. That's great information. Let's move on to railroads.
Railroads.
There's a couple months ago, there were about 3 derailments in Ohio that created a lot of problems.
Yep.
And, I did have a couple people call me and say, what happens in Fairfield? It would really be a shame if that happened. I can remember, again, as a kid, having one right downtown, right across from the railroad depot, actually.
And we had an Amtrak derailment in Batavia.
Yeah. So they, it is possible. And so just kind of go through the process of what happens, who's involved, who are the players, and what's the process. And of course, it's going to depend on what kind of train and where the location is. But go ahead.
So there's several trains that go through Jefferson County, not just Fairfield, but Jefferson County. And it's always a concern. There's no real good way to plan for a train derailment except for stick to our plans that we have in our overall comprehensive plan, which would be responding like we would in any other incident that we know is probably going to be a bigger incident. So in a train derailment situation, normally what happens is locals or the residents live around there called in and say, I heard a weird noise, heard this loud noise, or they saw it, right? Dispatch will take that information just like they do anything else, and they'll send it out. And probably the first people on scene are going to be your city PD here in Fairfield. In the county, it's going to be maybe your sheriff deputy. If it's closer to Batavia, one of those fire departments might be the first people there. But it's unlike anything else, those people's job is to size up the situation at the time. If they confirm it's a train derailment, they're going to get certain information. And they're all trained, all first responders or all firefighters in this county are trained in what we call hazards materials operations. They're not technicians, they're operations, meaning they can identify, give information, and do a little bit with the hazardous material, but they're not technicians. We have a crew that we contract with out of Atomo, Southern Iowa Response Group, SERG, which are hazmat technicians. So we always call them to come in for either advice or to do the more technical work. But they're all trained on identifying what's on that train. And normally those first people are going to have, if the conductors and the people on the train are out walking around, will have an idea. They'll say, oh, well, we've got this on there. We've got this many cars, this. Otherwise, we're all trained in identifying placards and stuff on rail cars. And normally we do that at a distance if we can. But if there's nothing leaking, obviously it's safer. We'll know what's on there, and the trains are required to carry manifests on there too. If it is a spill, if it is a leak, we will then go into our plan of the hazardous materials situation. What is the danger of this material? And we're all trained to look at our ERG, emergency response guides, and look up at that product and see what evacuation zones are. Does it mix with water? Firefighting capabilities, lower explosion limits and things like that are all listed in there. So you have an idea. It'll tell you evacuation zones, if it's 1,000 feet, if it's a half a mile, and then you formulate a plan at that time. And in the meantime, the railroad has probably now released it, known that they do have a derailment. And they were sending a representative from the railroad, plus probably the response contractor, who will then kind of look at it, see what response they're going to need for cleaning those rail cars up and things like that. But our local fire departments, our first responders, would initially be responsible for the evacuations. And normally, or not normally, a lot of times you're going to shelter in place in certain situations, depending on wind speed, depending on humidity, and things like that. And we all we understand that. So you have to make difficult decisions at the time to say, okay, if you're a mile southeast of this incident, a good thing about our Alert Iowa is we can triangulate and send that out to certain populations that are in that zone, right? And then we will be evacuating that, but all relies on what's on those trains and different other factors. So when you talk about an overall train derailment plan, we're treating it like any other hazardous material, any other incident until we find out more. You will get, if there is a spill, you will get DNR on site, and then they will be talking to a supervisor at DNR, and then they will be in contact with the EPA to start doing, DNR will do water monitoring, EPA will do air monitoring to check the contaminants in the air.
So when you talk about sheltering in place in your home, you could also give instructions like to turn off your air conditioning, for example, right?
If we're going to give instructions, and again, that's all going to come out through public information. social media, the news, radio, your alerts on your phones, your landlines, text. If it says shelter in place, if it says evacuation, we are setting up a shelter at the Civic Center. This is where you're going to evacuate to for the time being. But shelter in place, you're turning off your HVAC, meaning air conditioning, heating units, shutting your doors, shutting your windows, and you're sheltering in place until you're told you don't have to shelter in place anymore. And that happens quite often.
Okay, great. It's good to know. Good to know. And case in point, you're going to have to know what you're dealing with before you know if it's an evacuation. You know, it may be on the south part of town because the Civic Center's too close. So, right, that's why we can't always just have this stated place that this is the shelter.
Sure, and we have...
it moves around.
Yes, and we have, like I said, we have memorandums of understanding with places in town, not only just Fairfield, but the county. You know, it's a little harder in the smaller towns because they don't have the facilities like we do here, but it will be quickly publicized if we need to evacuate where we're setting up a shelter at. And you know how it works is it's mitigated locally as much as we can until it can't be local anymore, and then we reach out. You know, I have it really good because I have some really great partners around Southeast Iowa, other EMs that have more equipment, drones and stuff like that. That, you know, I would call them right away. And then, you know, there's a duty officer on state Homeland Security. He's on duty all the time, 24/7, and you can make that phone call. If we exhaust the local resources, we have avenues to reach out. And if the state of Iowa declares a disaster and we've exhausted the state of Iowa's resources, that's when they reach out to the federal government. Yeah. So there's all kind of a sequence of plans. But every disaster starts locally, and every disaster is expected on the response to be handled locally until you can't handle that.
Yeah. And those other partners would be on scene pretty quickly.
Sure.
Like Railroad and DNR and all that.
I'm not sure the time frame. I think it's a couple hours, but Railroad is required to respond. They have sites set up for response.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. All righty. Good information. So let's end with, again, we want people to go to Alert.iowa.gov and also at Iowa Homeland Security, and this is at ready.iowa.gov, and we'll repeat these, and maybe we can have Jason put them up on the screen too at some point later. And your own emergency kit. So let's talk about that.
Well, I think the way I look at it. I just had this conversation today. You know, not just emergency kits, but when I say have a plan, you need to have a rally point. And I go back to, you know, if you have to leave your house, if you're not sheltering in place and, you know, you can't stay in your house because of damage or something, you should have that plan with your family where you're possibly, if the sheltering sites aren't set up, you know, a friend, a cousin, somewhere that after it's passed or whatever, you can get to that place and let people know you're safe, because that is a huge part in responding to emergency, knowing that people are accounted for and safe. We teach our second graders, we've been doing it on fire department for 25 years, and when they're in second grade, we teach all those children to have a safe zone outside their house or somewhere away from the house. So their whole family knows that and they practice it. So when the fire department shows up, we don't have to take the time. We can say, is everybody out of the house? They're all right here, yes, and we go about our business. We don't have to go do a search or, you know, worry about not fighting. So having the plan, having the kit, and having a rally point for your family is critical to the initial operations of certain disasters.
Yeah. So out on this, again, ready.iowa.gov, you can find an emergency supply kit. It's got a list of things that they suggest that you would need for a 3 to 5 day supply: water, food, first aid, money. If we don't have electricity, you might not be able to have ATMs, right? So, and if you need to go buy water or whatever. So go down the list there. It's a really good exhaustive list of things that you would need. There's a list for your pet of things that you might need. Supply kits for in your vehicle, and then just special items that might be specific to you and your family. So it's a little list here that you can check off, and it's very useful, I think. And when I saw it, I thought, well, yeah, I gotta do better. So, Any other things that you want to say about that, Brett? Those emergency kits?
No, I just think you got to think about your own family, and those are pretty exhaustive. They list about everything, and they have stuff for pets, like you said. But just something that you're gonna, like I said, to be able to be comfortable, maybe not comfortable, but survive, and for 3 to 5 days, you need to think about that. And there's a lot of things you don't think about. That flashlights, batteries, extra batteries. What happens normally if your light's power goes out, you pick up a flashlight and the batteries, you're dead. Well, that's normally happens in my house. So yeah, I mean, you can go buy that, and check stuff off, but you need to have a kit and you need to have a plan for any situation.
Yeah. Medications, don't wait till the last pill. That should be a
and the other
theme song.
There's a couple other things I would say is unless it's an emergency during one of these times, or we test our sirens, our outdoor warning sirens, the first of the month, every Saturday from April through September at 10 o'clock. If you don't hear the siren, or if you do hear the siren and you wonder what it is because you didn't hear the show, don't call 911 and ask them what's going on. And if it's not an emergency, we like people to stay off the 911. These people that work on our 911 center, they're fabulous. And when stuff gets rolling, they are extremely busy. And sometimes we might have one in there, but they do an incredible job in there. But the more the phones ring and get tied up with silly stuff, the more it takes them away from doing what they need to be doing. That's getting people there to help.
Right, exactly. Well, great, Brett. I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover, unless you've got anything else.
I don't. Like I said, I would just end on saying, we're fortunate to have the partners that we have. Our sheriff's department, our city police department, our EMS, they're all involved with a lot of this stuff, a lot of these meetings, and I appreciate what our elected officials do. Appreciate the commission bringing some good points to the table and supporting emergency management. And these are great partnerships that are just going to benefit the people of Jefferson County. Yeah,
great. Jason, do you have any questions online? Nothing? And we do have a little bit of an audience. Do you have a question? Yeah, go ahead and come up to the... It's not on? Oh, go ahead. You can just holler from there. I'll repeat your question.
I understand that for a tornado, there's very little warning, but after a disaster, whether it's a tornado or a train derailment or whatever, if people are not able to stay in their homes, if your home's destroyed or they're in a zone that has hazardous material, what would you say the shelter capacity would be for those people who are displaced? Would you say that that's adequate for people like me?
So the question is, after a disaster, whether it's a tornado or a train derailment, and there has to be some evacuation or a home's destroyed, what's our capacity for, our population to get to a shelter? And
well, the capacity really relies on the people you have that are, when you set up a more than a temporary short-term shelter, which is what once you get into a long-term shelter, we don't expect people to get into shelter. If there's still hazardous materials hanging around, or if there's a danger, we're going to leave that open. But you have to staff those facilities with enough people. So we would know staffing-wise if we had to move to another facility to house more people. We also rely on we can rely on the Red Cross to come in and help set up, whether it's get hotel rooms or set up temporary shelters. I think there's a misconception that the National Guard's going to come in with great big tents and we're going to be a tent camp out there. That's probably not going to happen. Matter of fact, the National Guard is there to help, but you have to go through the state normally to request that help, and that has to be normally a state-declared disaster. So to answer your question is, we feel like we have enough sheltering designated places that are part of our plans that we would be able to get the people there, get them what they need for a short term. But they're not, we're not there probably to be a long-term, week to 2 week sheltering place.
And I anticipate, too, that people would end up bunking with family and friends, possibly, or even possibly going out of town, like, for example, I have a brother in Mount Pleasant, right? I could go say, hey, can I come over for a few days, right?
Yeah, I know when the derecho, the first one that hit back in 2020, I went up to Cedar Rapids and helped up there for a day, and it was, their biggest issue was capacity and sheltering and finding enough sheltering. They also didn't have electricity and everything else, so people needed to get somewhere because it was summertime and it was hot, and needed water, and a lot of people came in to help that. But so I feel comfortable with the sheltering designated places that we have and what we could bring in to house them temporarily.
Yeah.
And again, those would be you would be informed of that through different channels of where those are going to be. The responders are going to be initially responding, and those shelter areas would be set up accordingly hopefully in a timely manner. But it's going to take a little bit of time to get everybody staffed in there.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Good question. So I think we're going to end there. Again, I want to point out 2 places that you can go to, Alert.iowa.gov, and for emergency kits, Ready.iowa.gov.
And Jefferson County Emergency Management Facebook. We're currently working on a county website that I'm hoping to be a part of, but I will tell you, if you're signed into and following me on emergency management, any severe weather, anything that's going on, I'm usually in the know before most people in the National Weather Service. Will have actual briefings, and they'll let us know things during the day that I can put information out there before it comes out to the public sometimes.
Yeah, great idea. Yeah, again, go to Facebook and emergency management. Awesome. Okay, so this will be out on Fairfield Media's YouTube. So hopefully, if you weren't able to watch tonight, you can watch at your leisure, and that's what this is designed to do, is to get the information out there, and hopefully we'll have some watchers of it beyond tonight.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Great. I really appreciate, Brett, that
thanks for having me again.
Came, and I thought we had a lot of good information to share.
I didn't know if I was going to make it. We just had a fire call I was at, so.
Oh, no.
I'm hoping I can make it, but we made it.
Yeah, great. Well, again, thank you, and thank you, Jason, and thank you for coming out and listening. So, yeah, great.